Hey guys, I know I said I'd be back this week with the new upload, but I'm a bit under the weather, so I'll be back next week instead. So for this week's compilation, I'm compiling the hardest Pokemon to evolve from Sword and Shield, Legends Arceus, and Scarlet and Violet. Hope you guys enjoy, and with that being said, I'll see you guys all next week with some new content. By the way, Happy New Year.
Pokemon Sword and Shield have brought us some old and new Pokemon into the world of Galar. Some Pokemon come in many shapes and sizes. Some also evolve into very different Pokemon as well. Speaking of evolutions, today I wanted to go over the top 10 hardest Pokemon to evolve in Pokemon Sword and Shield. Evolutions can go from trading, to having certain items, and even some weird conditions like friendships. Pokemon Sword and Shield brought us a plethora of old and new Pokemon to evolve and discover on our own. And today, I wanted to point out which ones I found the most difficult to do. With that being said though, let's hop into the hardest evolutions in Pokemon Sword and Shield. To start off the list, we actually don't have a single Pokemon, but instead quite a few that share this minor annoyance of an evolution gate: required moves. Pokemon that require specific moves to evolve require that you know what the evolving move is in the first place. New players cannot be expected to know what moves the Pokemon needs to evolve, or where to even get those moves in general. And veteran players may know some moves, but may not know how to get that move. An example of this is Piloswine. You go out into the wild area and catch yourself a Piloswine at a decent or so level, and you know that Ancient Power is what it needs to evolve. From there, you start grinding levels and going ham on anything that moves into your area for experience, but you get nothing. Turns out, you caught it after the level it should have learned Ancient Power, so now you have to go move or learn it, and the whole process can be somewhat annoying. In at the 9th slot, we have a Pokemon that I find to be quite awesome, but the evolution can be painful, especially if you don't have the specific form you want. Toxel evolving into Toxtricity was already kind of hell in its own right. You have access to Toxel as early as Route 5. You can get it by talking to one of the workers at the breeding nursery. You get Toxel at level 1, and then training it up to level 30 to evolve it can be quite a challenge because of how frail and underleveled it is, compared to the rest of a standard team. So leveling is one point, but not the main premise. Earlier I mentioned specific form. Toxtricity has two forms, Amped and Low Key. In order for Toxel to evolve into the form you want, it needs to have the right nature for it to evolve. For example, if I wanted a Low Key form Toxtricity, one of the natures that I would need is Relaxed. There are other natures, but this is just an example. For the Amped form, Toxel would have to be a Naughty nature in order for it to evolve. Like I said before, there are other ones, this is just primarily an example. So getting the right form can be a pain, and that's why Toxtricity makes its way to number 9 on this list. At number 8, we have a variety of Pokemon on the same spot. This is a spot solely for gender-specific evolutions. This one applies for all gender-specific Pokemon, but some specific ones I will mention are Frostlass, Salazzle, and Gallade. In order for Snorunt to evolve into a Frostlass, it has to be a female with the Dust Stone. Salandit needs to be a female in order for it to evolve into Salazzle. What's messed up about Salandit though, is that the percentage to find a female is quite low. The percentage is actually 12.5% to be exact, so that's exceptionally low. The last one is Gallade. Ralt is already a rare enough Pokemon, so trying to find that could be a pain. But once it's male though, it should be simple enough, just pop a Dawnstone on it and boom, you got yourself a Gallade. There are also other gender evolutions, but I feel these three were the most prominent ones that came to mind. Either way, you need to have a specific gender to evolve certain Pokemon. The steps to this can be a little difficult, especially if you have a Pokemon like Salazzle. Oh, and good luck with its shiny. Moving on to the 7th slot of this list, we have something that could be really hard depending on your personal situation. If you don't have access to Nintendo Switch Online, then all the in-game trade evolutions will be very difficult to acquire. Some of the Pokemon in this list include Gengar, Machamp, Gigalith, Gourgeist, and Trevenant, only to mention a few. Although if you have Nintendo Online, then trade evolutions should be quite easy. To add on top of this though, there are also evolutions with specific items that are a pain. An example of this would be Slurpuff and Aromatisse. Their items can be fun to get, and the trading also is meh. I guess my biggest tip to evolve your trade evolution Pokemon is to just make as many friends as you possibly can. Or just have one really good friend that will evolve them all for you. That's what happened to me. I know that's what I did, and I feel kind of shameful because I'm a lame-o, but get out there, go trade Pokemon, and have fun. from all generic trait evolutions to a very specific pair of Pokemon. This is why these two Pokemon come into the number 6 slot. Meet Acelgor and Excavalier. These two Gen 5 Pokemon are only obtainable by trading Carablast with Shelmet. As you can see, Carablast takes the helmet of Shelmet and adapts it into Excavalier's armor, whilst Shelmet shreds its armor to become a super fast ninja. The process is actually a lot easier if you get either Shelmet or Carablast. You could get one and your friend could get the other. I find this process of evolution definitely one of the most unique ones in all Pokemon. Heck, I would even call it one of my favorites personally. These two Pokemon were actually the last mons I needed in order for me to complete my dex, so I was happy I was able to get my hands on both Excavalier and Acelgor. So find yourself one or the other and trade with a friend, and that will be all you need. The later half of this list starts off with a little troublesome Pokemon known as Hitmontop. Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee are two Pokemon that evolve via one stat, being higher than the other. For Hitmonchan, there needs to be more defense than attack at level 20. For Hitmonlee, there needs to be more attack than defense. Hitmontop, however, needs to have it so both attack and defense are equal, which I can say is a pain in the rear to get. Now, how I personally evolved mine was I just used vitamins, and then I spent the items I needed and I was able to get the stats up equally. I also think that natures can play a part in it as well. So if Tyrek has a neutral nature, I would find it easier obviously over an adamant nature where the main focus is attack. Trying to keep stats equal without vitamins to me can be a pain, and I've always done it with vitamins, so that's probably why I find it a little bit easier than some other people do. Also, trying to capture the right nature can also be kind of a chore, so good luck with evolving your Tyrog into Hitmontop. Reigning into number 4 is one of my favorite pseudo-legendaries, being Goomy, evolving all the way into Goodra. Now Goodra, as I'm sure a lot of you remember in Generation 6, was a pain to get due to the rain. The rain was very inconsistent in Generation 6, and I can safely say the exact statement with Generation 8. Weather, as a lot of you guys know, is randomized in this game. You can fiddle with your Switch's time or whatever, but as far as I know, there's no set in stone way to get the weather you want. So evolving can be rather difficult if there is no rain present. Plus there's also the fact that Goomy is a dragon and pseudo-legendary Pokemon, so trying to evolve it into Silgu is also rather difficult. All I can say is, thank Arceus for XP candies, they make your life a whole lot easier. I should also mention that not only do you need rain, Silgu also has to be over level 50, so this evolution can definitely be a pain. Man, I will tell you guys, this evolution really triggered me. Ever since Generation 4, I've always found Sneasel's evolution into Weavile rather tedious, and in Gen 8, I find it a little more tedious because of how late in the game you get a Razor Claw. In order to get Weavile, you need to get the Razor Claw. The Razor Claw is in the Dusty Bowl across a pond of water, so you know that you're going to need the Surf Bike. The player has to get over 6 badges before they get access to it. On top of where to find the Razor Claw, the player also has to equip the Razor Claw to Sneasel and wait to nighttime to evolve it. If you don't play Pokemon at night, this could be a problem for you, unless you obviously change your clock, because anyone can do that. But if you don't like cheating and you like doing it more legitimately, then that could be a little bit more difficult for you. The main reasoning for Weavile being at 6 is just because of where to find the Razor Claw in terms of game availability. It's late, and personally, being a shield player, I'd prefer to have Weavile before the 4th gym going up against Alistair. If I could get Weavile much earlier, Alistair would literally be more of a walk in the park. Now coming to the second to last slot of this list, we have Sirfetch'd. Sirfetch'd was probably a Pokemon a lot of you guys were expecting to be on this list, and you'd be right to assume so. Sirfetch'd has one of the most unique methods of evolving that we have seen in a very long time. I will admit though, despite it being unique and clever, I didn't evolve it on my own. I had someone trade me theirs. To evolve Glorian Farfetch and the Sirfetch'd, there needs to be 3 critical hits in a single battle. To be able to time that can take some proper planning and skill, so I wish anyone the best of luck doing that. Also, shout out to all my fellow Pokemon shielders out there. We had the trade to get this Pokemon. We are troopers, guys. Sirfetch'd has one of the coolest evolutions though, and I'm happy Game Freak put in such a great concept. Now before we jump into the number 1 slot, I want to take a moment to give an honorable mention to probably the most unique Pokemon to evolve since last gen. It's none other than Inkay and how to evolve it into Malamar. If you remember back in the X and Y days, you had to not only level up your Inkay to level 30 or above, but also flip your 3DS or 2DS upside down using the gyroscope sensor to evolve Inkay into the fearsome Malamar. But in Pokemon Sword and Shield, we're on the Switch. So what you have to do now is turn the handheld mode of the Switch upside down and then level up Inkay to level 30 or above, just like back in the day. It's very unique to say the least, but it just misses the spot on this top 10. The number 1 hardest Pokemon to evolve in Pokemon Sword and Shield would have to be Runerigus. I hope I pronounced that right. Why is that, you might ask? Well, dear viewers, let me explain first. You need to have a Galarian Yamask, which in itself isn't that hard, but for it to evolve, that's where the fun begins. So to evolve Yamask into Reneragus, you have to first have your Yamask be inflicted with 49 or more points of damage. Then you have to travel to the Dusty Bowl and find a specific stone structure that you can see right there. And then, Yamask will suddenly evolve. I don't know who over a Game Freak that thought of this evolution, but it's so strange to me, and that is why I think Reneragus is the hardest Pokemon to evolve in Pokemon Sword and Shield.
Pokemon Legends Arceus has been upon us for a little while now, and the game's fresh approach has gotten casual and hardcore fans alike excited. And as a content creator, it really does feel like a privilege to be able to make these videos for you guys, and be a part of it all whenever there's a new release in the series. It's a good time to be a fan right now. But now that the game has been out for a little while, one can't help but try to think of what is similar and what's different with previous games in the series. And one of those things are Pokemon evolutions. In the core series of Pokemon games that we all know and love, there's no denying that while Pokemon evolving can be a bit tedious at times, especially if you're more of a casual player trying to get a Pokemon like Dragonite in one of the earlier generations. In Pokemon Legends Arceus, however, evolving your Pokemon feels overall smoother. Now, there's definitely a part of me that wonders if that's partly because the game feels fresh and new. But even with that, I think most would agree that the process just feels easier. That does get me thinking though. What about Legends Arceus? Which are the Pokemon that feel uniquely more difficult within the context of that game? While playing, there are definitely a few that will stick out among the others, just like with the core games. So that's why today, I've decided to look at the 7 hardest Pokemon to evolve in Pokemon Legends Arceus. Though bear in mind, these 7 are not in any particular order. Why in no particular order? Because I felt like it. Anyways, let's get into it. The first I'd like to bring up are Overqwil and Wordeer. And yes, I'm counting them as a single entry. This is also a good time to also bring up that when I say hardest to evolve, I'm also factoring tediousness and in-game vagueness, particularly because the game is still fairly new. These two Pokemon have a pretty strange method of evolution. Overqwil evolves from a Hisuian Qwilfish, requiring the player to use the strong style version of Barb Barrage at least 20 times. And Wordeer is similar, requiring the use of the agile style of Psy-Shield Bash at least 20 times. This sounds simple enough, right? Well, as far as I've been able to see, the game never clearly tells you this. It does try to give you little hints through the tasks in the decks, but it's still never clear enough for some players to knowingly evolve these two on purpose. The act itself isn't anything crazy, it's just figuring it out that's definitely a little weird. It's nice that the game is having more to evolutions than just leveling up and other more typically known methods like stones. But if you don't know how to go about evolving these two and aren't trying to use a guide, it can be a serious problem trying to figure out how this works, especially if you're trying to do one of the side quests that requires you to obtain one of these, like the Sea Legends quest. The next on this list is Garchomp. I don't want to spend too much time on this one because there's nothing actually too unique about why Garchomp is on the list. One reason is the level 48 requirement, which isn't new, but the fact is that you don't get Gible until a little later in the game, which of course means it'll be significantly underleveled compared to the rest of your team at the point in the game. That means if you want to add the full evolution line to the dex, you're likely going to evolve it specifically from Gible, which, like a lot of pseudo-legendaries, is typically really tedious. Not to mention, Arceus has fewer battles than usual in favor of exploration and catching Pokemon. So the meta of the game, so to speak, can make the grind feel just a bit more monotonous than it maybe would have been otherwise, even with the automatic experience share. Then there's the evolutions. Most of you watching this surely understand how these typically work, and it hasn't actually changed much in Legends Arceus. When it comes to the stone evolutions, it will depend on your method of acquisition. If you're just trying to discover one, then it's just a bit random. You'll have to get pretty lucky to find the stone you want, but it's not too terrible. You can also purchase them for merit points, but they're not cheap. But still, regardless of how much time it may take you, it's nothing too crazy, yeah? Well, there's one other reason I felt like putting evolutions here: Sylveon. You're probably thinking, wait, Sylveon? Isn't that the closest thing to Eevee's default evolution in this game? And yes, you're right. If you just level Eevee up and don't make a specific alteration to its moveset, it will eventually just evolve into Sylveon. You see, in Gen 8, they had changed Sylveon's method of evolution. It's not specifically based on the affection system anymore, and is based on friendship, just like Espeon and Umbreon. When your friendship is high enough and Eevee has a Fairy-type move, it will evolve into Sylveon, and Eevee will naturally learn a Fairy-type move early on. Now, if you know this is no problem. But if you didn't play Sword and Shield, you probably aren't going to know this. And it's another one of those things the game isn't going to make clear to you. I was hesitating on putting this on the list, but I noticed just how many players were having this happen to them by accident while trying to get Espeon or Umbreon. It seems like a common beginner's trap. In fact, of all the Pokemon evolution subjects on this list, this of all things was what I found the most posts about, as far as evolutions confusing players. Maybe it's because Arceus brought back a lot of players that were on a hiatus from the core games or something like that. Oh, and on top of all of that, some people also weren't sure how to change or remove Pokemon moves, as the game also was perhaps just not direct enough about it for some players. I'd love to see the physical reaction of someone that didn't know about the Sylveon change, expecting your cool Umbreon to make its grand debut in the dark of night, and then suddenly being greeted by a smiling, dapper Sylveon staring you in the face. The next evolution I'd like to bring to attention is Porygon Z. This one is both rather time-consuming and random, and I think anyone trying to get this evolution line knew this was going to be on the list. First, to catch the base Porygon, you need to be able to find a space-time distortion in the Crimson Mirelands. So there's already a bit of luck here in needing to be able to run into one of these distortions and be able to find and catch Porygon. It does make sense that Porygon is handled this way though, as Porygon shouldn't exist in this time period. It makes for a fun reason to include this Pokemon in the game. And quite frankly, once you catch Porygon, the rest is not that bad. The dubious disc and upgrade items required for the evolutions are also found in distortions, but you do have the option to obtain these items with merit points at least. So if you're not getting lucky with these items, I hope you saved up those points. Well, I probably made it sound like I don't like the effort it takes to catch and evolve this evolution line. I do think it makes Porygon feel special in a game like this, as it should, as it's probably the most out-of-place creature in the entire game. Alright, you want to talk about feeling grindy? Then we have to mention Goodra. Goodra is another dragon type that's known for taking a bit of time to actually obtain. You need to get your Sliggoo to level 50, so it's a bit similar to the situation with fellow dragon type Garchomp. I think the fact that Goomy just needs to hit level 40 to evolve into Sliggoo in the first place is actually the worst aspect of this. It's just not a terribly strong Pokemon for how long it goes without going into its second form, and certainly a far cry from its final form. Then there's the final requirement to evolve in the Goodra itself. It has to hit at least level 50 in the rain. This isn't a new mechanic for this Pokemon, but it feels like it's even more of a chore in Arceus to get rain to show up. But that could just be me. Sleeping over and over and over to reset the area to try to get it to start raining in an area is really lame. That being said, there is an alternate way to get Goodra that I'm not factoring in too much when putting it in this list.
If you can eventually get the alpha version of the Hisuian Sliggoo, you can straight away get it to evolve the Goodra as long as it's leveled in the rain. You just need to actually find and catch an alpha Sliggoo. But even then, we're talking about going from Gumi to Goodra here. Pokemon Legends Arceus introduced a new obtainable Pokemon for Generation 8, Bascu Legion. And with that introduction comes a pretty weird requirement for its evolution. In Legends Arceus, Basculin got a new white stripe color variant, and this is the variant that can evolve into Bascu Legion. And the method requirement for its evolution is something that I'm not sure anyone would directly figure out. I believe something in the Pokédex may hint at it slightly, but the requirement is still so unexpected. Seriously, listen to this. In order to get your white-striped Basculin to evolve into Bascu Legion, your Basculin needs to take at least 294 recoil damage, and any damage that's taken that caused the Pokemon to faint will not count. Imagine just catching one of these and never realizing anything about this, and deciding to avoid using moves that cause recoil in your playthrough. Not to mention that it's not uncommon for players to get one at, say, level 25. You're not getting much recoil damage at that level. And again, battles in Legends Arceus aren't always super frequent, so it could take longer than you'd like if just playing normally. Again, this isn't exactly hard, but with the game being new, it's definitely going to throw certain players off for a while if they don't specifically look into it. It makes you wonder how many people have a Bascu Legion without even realizing how it even evolved in the first place. Even though this list isn't ordered, I'd like to think I saved the most difficult one for last, Ursaluna. Once again, the context of the game does add to this being as difficult as it is. But even without that, it's an evolution that requires an item that can't actually be purchased, the Peat Block. A previous entry that perhaps also felt a bit convoluted, Porygon Z, at least has items that you can purchase with merit points. But you really do need to go out and either find a peat rock out in the wild or discover the quest where the player can be rewarded the item to obtain an Ursaluna. But there's also the fact that you may just not know that you even need this for this evolution. Or in another case, you might actually find a peat block but have no idea what it's for. You see, you can't just use the peat block on your Ursaring and expect it to evolve into an Ursaluna. It doesn't work that way. You need to specifically use it on a full moon. There aren't really enough clues in the game that I know of to let players know how this works. And I've seen quite a few people around asking about how this even works, especially on the first week of the game's release. You need to keep going back to sleep over and over to move the moon cycle along, and keep checking the moon in the sky to make sure you're on the right phase to use that. You can also just not check the sky and instead continue to monitor if the peat block is compatible with the Ursaring in your party every night. But where's the fun in that? I just can't believe how many people I've seen ask, why isn't my peat block working? Due to not knowing or understanding the full moon requirement. The method is still interesting for what it is, and some players will probably find it satisfying to finally pull it off. But there's definitely some barriers to both figuring it out and actually getting it done.
Having a whole new generation of Pokemon among us now means that there are probably going to be some new evolutions or evolution methods worth discussing. Actually, even if it's not technically a new generation, there still seems to be new evolution methods introduced. Look no further than Legends Arceus. Bascu Legion, anyone? Yeah, and once again, now that Scarlet and Violet have been out for at least a little while now, I have to ask, which are the hardest Pokemon to evolve in the game? Now, before we get right into things and start the list, I'd like to point out that these are not in order, just like the Legends Arceus list we did almost a year ago. I feel the idea of what makes an evolution difficult is a bit more subjective than other list topics. It's also a little harder to differentiate tedious and difficult when comparing some of these cases. As we go through the list, this will become even more obvious. Now, without any further ado, let's take a look at these.
Starting off our list is Palafin. I find this one a bit weirder to evolve than it should be. But again, Palafin is a pretty weird Pokemon itself, so maybe they couldn't just let you hit level 38 and call it a day. To get your Finizen to evolve, you need to hit at least level 38 while in a Union Circle. Then it'll evolve into Palafin. This is pretty easy if you know someone with the game you can just hook up with in order to accomplish this. But you do ultimately need a friend that plays, or at least the ability to share a lobby code with randoms online willing to help you. Obviously, there are players that won't immediately know about this, and others who may just avoid Pokemon that require weird evolution mechanics. I can also imagine some very young players also not really understanding that this is how this would ever work. Though I imagine they would figure it out one way or another eventually, it's just really odd for some people that this type of stuff is an evolution requirement in the series. That being said, when you consider how powerful Palafin is, this still feels like a small thing to do for such a Pokemon with an insane signature ability. Next, let's just get this out of the way. Trade evolutions. Getting these evolutions won't be reliable for people who don't have friends to trade with or at least have some type of fortunate circumstances. These also get harder to get as the generation gets older. And once the generation comes out, it only continues to get more difficult for certain Pokemon if they don't make it in or aren't normally obtainable. But what makes this stick out more now going into Scarlet and Violet is how it was handled in Legends Arceus. The game didn't emphasize things like player-to-player trading in the way traditional Pokemon games did. And as such, you could evolve Pokemon that would normally require trading by using items like the linking cord. Now, I'm not saying we need to repeat the same exact requirement, but I do think an alternate method for some Pokemon would be nice. I understand they want players to use certain features and interact with others, but trading online isn't exactly a unique concept anymore. And it was more interesting when you had to do it in person with even older generations, albeit far more difficult to deal with if you didn't know anyone. At least there was more of a novelty. That being said, it's still not difficult, but I'm sure at least half the people watching this think trade evolution and still just can't help but groan. There's also more simple evolutions that I'd still consider among the more difficult or tedious to evolve, like Larvesta and Volcarona. This is for a few reasons. It's already not exactly a common Pokemon to come across in the first place, but it doesn't evolve until level 59. Larvesta is overall pretty weak for something that won't evolve until the late game, making it a struggle to really want to bother leveling during the bulk of your actual playthrough. Of course, if you love Volcarona that much, you won't care, but you'll definitely feel the length of how long it takes to get this thing to evolve. At the very least, Volcarona is consistently a pretty strong Pokemon, so it's another case of the player being rewarded for their patience. Now it's time to talk about a new Pokemon that you all knew was going to be here, Gholdengo. In order to evolve your Gimmighoul, you gotta collect 999 Gimmighoul coins, which spawn basically anywhere throughout the entire region of Paldea, in both their roaming and chest forms. It's a pretty crazy method to introduce for an evolution that will definitely take time. You'll encounter them while playing normally, but if you really want to get the amount you need, you'll need to specifically keep an eye out for them. Similar to some of the other Pokemon mentioned on the list, you'll be rewarded well for your efforts, as Gholdengo is a pretty strong Pokemon with a lot of personality. These coins though, they can appear seemingly anywhere. It's not the sort of thing where you can camp respawns of coins so easily, as the chest form Gimmighoul that give you the largest amount of coins only have a 5% chance of respawning each day. So you'll really need to be on the lookout for them around all of Paldea. Of course, these are just the roaming Gimmighoul that are in large abundance with a 50% chance of respawning. But with those, you'd basically be doing it nearly 900 times, as they only give a few coins on average. And that just sounds awful, so just stick to chests as your primary source of Gimmighoul coins. At least if you're not rushing it, playing the game normally and paying attention will inevitably award you enough coins for this unique evolution. Let's go back to familiar territory with pseudo-legendaries in general. Nothing has really changed regarding how tedious these can be to evolve, and therefore they're still technically among the most difficult to evolve in Scarlet and Violet. The two that really stick out are still Hydreigon and Dragapult. Both evolution lines don't reach their second form until level 50, which is just ridiculous and makes leveling them feel like even more of a chore. At least most fans will agree that Dino is pretty cute, but still. Leveling has become generally easier in recent gens, but I can't help but try to imagine how it would feel if Hydreigon was a Gen 1 Pokemon. it'd make leveling Dragonite seem rather tame in comparison. Next, let's talk about a new feature, the Let's Go mechanic. I find it hard to tell if fans as a whole actually like this new mechanic or not sometimes. But either way, with its introduction, it's also now a requirement to evolve certain Pokemon, those being Pawmot, Brambleghast, and Ropska. I'm going to guess that most people find this specific part of this new feature pretty annoying as a requirement. Obviously, I agree to a certain extent since I've put it in this video, but I'm not sure if I'd say it's that bad. If you're not familiar, it's only after walking 1,000 steps and then leveling up that your Pokemon will evolve. There's no challenge or creativity to it. You just need to walk around with your Pokemon a bunch. Honestly, now that I've said it out loud, yeah, that's pretty lame. At least Palma is a pretty cute Pokemon to walk around with. There's also a few exploits you may have seen that try to get your Pokemon to run in place or in circles, such as jumping on the roof of a Pokemon Center. I don't hate this feature, but I do think this evolution aspect isn't the most well thought out. Also, if you're not using any weird methods to make this faster, your Pokemon actually isn't as fast as your regular run speed. So you can't just totally mindlessly just run up some road until you've reached 1,000 steps. You need to actually slow down and make sure you haven't outrun your little guy. Okay, that's another thing that sounds even worse than I realized now that I've said it out loud. Let's just go to our final entry on the list. The last Pokemon evolution I'd like to talk about is Dusk Form Lycanroc. If you don't know ahead of time what to do in order to get this form, then like a few other evolutions, you basically play the entire game without ever knowing what it even is. There might be some NPC dialogue in Scarlet and Violet that could give a hint at it, but even so, this method is very specific. You need to find a Rockruff with the Own Tempo ability, and then evolve it when the sun is setting so it can become the Dusk Form Lycanroc. Previously, it had to be within the 5 PM hour, but time in Scarlet and Violet is a bit different. It doesn't run on real time. As for finding a Rockruff with this ability, it isn't immediately obvious that it'll have it. You need to be prepared. The Own Tempo ability will resist Intimidate, for example. So if you have a Pokemon with that, that's an easy way to know instantly without wasting any time. Due to the changes with how the time of day works, you have about 6 minutes during sunset to evolve your Rockruff with Own Tempo in the Dusk Form Lycanroc, or else you'll need to try again. If you understand these rules to its evolution, it's still not that terrible, but it's still something that's very easy to miss if you don't know about it, as well as easy to mess up if you're not fully paying attention. If Lycanroc is like maybe your favorite Pokemon, then you probably did this as early as you could and didn't even mind the process all that much. But if you're just trying to do this for the sake of completion, I can't imagine that this isn't one of the last things to do. Because while an exception, it's not that terrible, it just feels bad when you think about the specifics. That first step of preparing to settle down and seeing if you can find that Rockruff with the right ability is the part that most people will be annoyed with.